Well, thank you for this invitation, and I wanted to just start with the title of my presentation, which is The Answers Take Time. I'm not presumptuous enough to say that my work provides the answers, but I think my work provides the questions for the viewer to start thinking about some of the answers. So I'm going to start my presentation by giving you some context of my background, and then walk you through some of my more recent projects, and also talk a little bit about the process, because all of you are practitioners. I thought that may be helpful too. So I was born in England, and this is me as I think the first Indian Virgin Mary in England. So my experiences influences the lens that my work refracts through. So as I mentioned, I was born in England, and then grew up in India. I lived there for about 18 years before now living in the United States. So these three cultural experiences influence my work. Living between cultures also gives me a different perspective, and we heard today about the number of people who also live between cultures. Which is what I try to do in my artwork, is to change perspectives. In India, you have to choose your major before you go to college, and you can't change it. I chose mathematics all for the wrong reasons and really suffered through my undergraduate degree in India. The only good thing about my university is that we had one optional subject a year, and I took a photography class through the physics department. And these are two of the images that I created, which really don't show much potential as a photographer. But seeing that image come up in the developer really turned me on to photography. And so now I'm going to show you some of my work. I started as a still photographer, but my work has evolved as the digital toolbox has expanded. So I started as a still photographer, but now I've moved more into video and installation and also sculptural objects. And my more collaborative work started after the backlash of 9/11. So this first project that I'm going to show you is called Open Wound, Stories of Partition, which took over a decade to complete. First, what is partition? During the partition of British India, over 15 million people were displaced in just 3 months, and 1 million died. I can go more into this history, but with the 20 minutes, I'm not going to go extensively into it. But as a result, in 1947, India, as we know it now, was created along with East and West Pakistan. East Pakistan became Bangladesh in 1971. So I studied in India and didn't really study much about this horrific historical incident. But when I started doing this work, the children of partition were in their 70s and 80s, and I decided to collaborate with them to tell their stories. So this is the Kohli story. I went from being wealthy to a penniless refugee. My father went back after 2 years to his home at Lakshmi Mansions, flat number 39. The person living there had a British mother and a Muslim father. The man asked if he would like a cup of tea. My father said, when I was served in my silver tea service with my monogram on it, I realized that I was homeless. What amazes me is that I walk into these strangers' homes and they open up to me. We initially bond by looking at their photo album. This is one of the strengths of photography, the power to trigger memories and shared storytelling. So it all starts with the family photograph, which, I go through the albums and we choose one of the photographs. And then I get 3 generations, usually of women, to reenact the original photograph, which I then put into the original photograph using Photoshop. And then using programs like Final Cut, I thread them together to create the photo animation. After completing the work in India, I was awarded the Sylvia Chandley Professorship in Peace Studies and Nonviolence from the University of Rhode Island to expand stories of partition, to include the stories of Pakistani and Bangladeshi families. I wanted to explore the multiple perspectives on partition. I think this interest comes from someone who has lived between cultures. I am Indian, but I'm also aware that there are other sides to the story that needs to be told. So for about 2 or 3 years, I photographed over 20 families from Pakistan and Bangladesh who now live in North America. Unsurprisingly, the stories were very similar to what I heard in India. If anything, they included even more graphic information. So this is Abdul Halim's story. My mother never told my father what happened. She said he never asked. She never spoke about losing a child. My father said that he didn't want to know how she was saved, as there was always a stigma about women who survived. My mother told my wife how my sister died. She was given a choice to choose between my sister or me, but couldn't make one. It was decided for her. So in the installation of the stories of the children of partition, I have 2 books, which are 1947 encyclopedias, which have iPads embedded in them, which have the videos playing. On the left is India, and on the right is Pakistan, with this haunting video playing in the background. And the video's at a site that has the scars of partition. So when I showed this work in India, a gentleman whose family had gone through partition read the stories from both India and Pakistan and said, "Oh my God, the same thing happened to them." So my decade-long work on partition led me to stumble on the story of the Indian soldiers who fought in World War II. Does anyone know how many Indians fought in the Second World War, South Asians? I find it staggering that 2.5 million Indians fought in World War II. They were supposedly a volunteer army, but they're barely acknowledged in South Asia or globally. And this is really surprising, especially because World War II was truly global with pivotal conflicts in both Europe, Africa, and the Asian theaters. India gained independence from their British colonial power in 1947. And as Yasmin Khan, author of India at War, wrote, in the rush to write new histories of nation states after 47, much of the history of the 1940s was locked out from official memory. Tales of the freedom struggle took precedence. So part of the issue was that these South Asians were fighting for their British colonizer. And, again, I'm not going to go too much into the history because of time. So the 2018 Kochi-Muziris Biennale, which is the biggest exhibition in Asia, commissioned me to do a piece for their show in 2018. I wanted to also add that the initial idea that I had for the Biennale was a complete failure. And so I had to shift gears, and luckily I had done some previous experiments which allowed me to complete this work. But the point I wanted to emphasize is that every project I start doesn't become a success or isn't something I show the world. There's a number of failures that one has to go through before you, able to complete or get to the next milestone. So I focused on the Indian soldiers who fought in the Italian campaign of World War II. One of the reasons I chose the Italian campaign is because the Battle of Monte Cassino was pivotal in winning the war, and the Indian troops played a critical role. Their tenacity is reflected by the fact that the Indian soldiers were awarded 30% of the Victoria Crosses for soldiers fighting in Italy. In Italy, there are 5 graveyards with the remains of Indian soldiers, 2 just for Indians, and 1 is for Gurkhas who are from Nepal. They're in Arezzo, Cassino, Forlì, Sangro, and Rimini. So I projected archival footage of the Indian soldiers fighting in Italy onto their gravestones, and I edited this footage into different small vignettes. which were then projected. So I did this on their gravestones at dusk and dawn. And as art critic Nancy Brokaw wrote, the flickering images of long dead soldiers haunt their own gravestones. So on the opening day of the Biennale, my friend Yamini Nair sent me a photograph of her grandfather, Lieutenant Colonel Chakravarti, standing in front of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. What I loved about this photo is that you can connect with a person. So it sent me down this rabbit hole of sorts to collect or crowdsource photographs from some of these 2.5 million families whose whose ancestors fought in World War II. As compared to if you do a Google of Indian soldiers, all you get is headshots. And as someone who's not from a military family, I don't really connect to that. So I've been collecting these photographs from a range of different religions, castes, and socioeconomic backgrounds. And in the process of learning about this history, ask why is it not part of our collective narrative in South Asia or globally? Can we consider the human stories and contributions of the Indians who fought in the Second World War? Or are their stories caught up in an anti-colonial web? This history is complicated, and unfortunately, I don't have time to go into too much of the depth about the history. Getting to know who these people were, some came from middle-class families, some from royalty, and some from low-income families. Some were swashbuckling young men who believed in the cause, and others joined out of poverty in search of a regular meal and salary, exasperated by the human-made famine by the British in Bengal, which spread to other parts of the country. So how did I use these photographs? My role as an artist is to take that abstract number of 2.5 million Indian soldiers who fought in World War II and transform it into something that is tangible and accessible by a larger audience. Art can play a crucial role in shaping the politics of remembrance, challenging how we have internalized narratives of World War II. So what I did is I made 3D crystals of these photographs, which are lit from below and are in a space which has a video of some of the stories of these soldiers projected onto dhotis, which are like sarongs, which Indian men wear in India. So I'm going to play one clip from this installation. And unlike the Italian campaign, this includes stories from all 3 theaters where the Indians fought.
My father fought in the Second World War. The Indian Army's history is not so well recorded or words to that effect. I think one of the reasons is there is a sense of guilt that we were involved in listening to the British and doing certain things we should not have done. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre, it was not General Dyer himself, it was Indian troops that did the massacre.
I'm also aware that some of these people do not have family photographs. So in the installations of this work, I scroll the names of some of the 87,000 plus Indians who died in World War II, along with their age, position, and parents' name, making the viewer aware of the range of positions and socioeconomic differences. I just wanted to go a little bit into some of the unglamorous parts of being an artist and how do I organize the information that I collect from so many families. I use a program, an app called Trello, which allows me to, so there's different columns. So the first one is new contacts, who I have to follow up with, the photos and stories I received, and then, follow up if needed. The people who may not have as great a story, but if I, don't get enough stories, then maybe I should follow up on those. So I find it helps me really be organized and be able to find the information easily. Another program I use is Arena, which where you can create channels based on different topics. And instead of having different folders on my desktop, I can drop them into these different channels, and because they have a preview of what the article is about, it's very easy to find go back and find that information. So my multimedia installation also begs the question of who else is not acknowledged and help shape new perspectives. We are at a moment where memorials and histories are being reevaluated and reconsidered in significant ways. Art can play a crucial role in shaping remembrance by pulling back the veil on forgotten histories. My objective is to leverage visual media to elevate this narrative and integrate it into our shared historical and cultural legacy. I just also wanted to mention that in December, Minor Matters Publishing came out with a monograph of my book, which I brought a copy of, and the title of that is The Answers Take Time. And it's accessible through my website. So in closing, to paraphrase composer, lyricist, singer, actor, and playwright Lin-Manuel Miranda about living between cultures, he wrote, "As an outsider, one feels a little out of place everywhere, but it allows one to then be an observer." And I hope today I was able to try and change your perspective just a little bit. So thank you.